And so there were local communist groups that got set up in almost every city and town in Canada. This produced an odd result because in the United States, where the original formation of the communist movement was extraordinarily factionalized, the original Communist Party formed and immediately split in two. Then they had a unity convention and immediately split on different lines into two parties. So you had two really hostile to each other communist parties in the United States. Well, in Canada, we didn't have that exactly. But what you had was everybody who wanted to be a communist joined whichever group they came across first, and they'd be affiliated to one or other of the fighting American parties. There was no basis for it in Canadian politics, but people were joining whoever they met. The other thing that happened, so you had these two communist groups related roughly to the American parties. You also had a pro-Bolshevik current emerge in the Socialist Party of Canada. So when the May 1921 convention occurred, what it did was it brought together those disputing forces. The delegates to the original, that May 1921 convention, were one group from one of the communist parties, one group from one of the other communist parties, and two people who came from Winnipeg and Vancouver, Bill Moriarty and Jack Kavanagh, who were members of the Socialist Party left. So they were bringing together these different forces that had come to communism by their own different routes. And that what they called themselves was a party of a new type. And it was. There had not been anything like this in Canada before. And prior to 1917, probably the only place where there had been a party like that was in Russia. It will be, they said, this is from the Workers, this newspaper, Workers' World. It will be a party of action seeking contact with the workers, a party in which the theorists and doctrinaires as such will find small place, a party of the workers and with them in their daily struggles against capitalist oppression, seeking always to build up a united front of the working class for industrial freedom and emancipation from wage slavery. Those who joined the new party were virtually all of the members of the Socialist Party of North America. The great majority, probably 95% of the members of the Social Democratic Party, and although you can't get figures, at least a majority of the Socialist Party of Canada. So here's this astonishing thing. That's how that came together. Now, what did they do? What was this party like? That's the second topic in the book. Very briefly, after overcoming what Joey mentioned, this undergroundism, the belief that if you weren't illegal, you weren't a real revolutionary, they headed out and did some amazing things. They played a leadership role in the 1920s in every significant strike in the country. There simply was not a significant strike in this country that didn't have communist involvement in it. They were particularly strong among the coal miners of Cape Breton and Alberta, among the lumber workers of Northern Ontario and British Columbia, and among the garment workers in Toronto and Montreal. They played a big role in building the Canadian Labour Party, which was not there's no organization like it today in this country, but it basically was an alliance of communist and social democratic labor militants to run in elections so that they wouldn't run against each other. They work out a common slate. They also were involved in many other campaigns, including one that has largely been forgotten and really needs to be researched more, and that was their work for women's rights and for the right to abortion and birth control, which were a significant part of their program in the 1920s. Florence Custance was the only woman on the original Central Committee, led that fight. At the same time, and I found this is, I think, truly amazing, the party stood alone in the Communist International as the only one that refused to support Stalin's campaign against Trotsky. No other party did it. In 1925, Bill Moriarty was sent as a delegate to a meeting in the Executive Committee of the Communist International in Moscow. He discovered when he got there that there was going to be a vote to condemn Trotsky. So he sent a cable back to Toronto. How should I vote? And the party's Central Executive Committee sat down and met, and they voted unanimously that he should vote against the resolution. They told him, among other things, that this campaign had not contributed to the attractiveness of the Communist International. And so he did, and he was the only delegate to vote no. So not only was this party playing a major role in Canadian labour struggles and other struggles, it was also a remarkably self-confident, politically principled party, and one that wasn't willing to be told what to do. Were they Trotskyists? No, they weren't. They didn't understand all the issues in the fight in the Soviet Union. They just knew there was something wrong with what was going on, and they weren't going to be part of it. And they refused to publish the stuff in their papers. Despite pressure from Moscow, for over 2 years they held out. That's topic number 2. An amazing party in terms of its ability to work in the working class, in terms of a remarkable lack of factionalism. Unlike the American Party, for example. When the American Party finally got together, basically everybody who'd been in a different organization before just became a different faction inside the party. And then there was a group of people who thought there shouldn't be any factions, so they formed a faction to oppose all the other factions. Canadian Party had none of that. And that's not to say there weren't disagreements, often sharp ones. But during those early years, on the whole, it was a remarkably organization that worked remarkably well. Now, the third major topic in Canadian Bolshevik is the party's destruction at the end of its first decade. And you might think destruction is kind of a strong word, since there continued to be a communist party. But I don't think it is. Between 1928 and 1931, almost all of the Communist Party's founding leaders were expelled, including Morris Spector, Jack MacDonald, Bill Moriarty, Mike Buey, and many more. And in that same period, 3/4 of the party's membership walked out of the party. Just stopped paying their dues, went away. A new team took over, headed by Tim Buck, who had been the one-party member. He was the one that basically carried out the next time he got sent to Russia to participate after Bill Moriarty. He was the next one sent over as a delegate. He didn't cable back for instructions. He voted for Stalin. His faction took over the party. They abandoned the program and the tactics they'd used in the 1920s. They split the unions, calling for red unions. As I said, they started calling all the Social Democrats social fascists. And they adopted this nickname, Tim Buck's Party, which is not a bad name for it, because it was a lot more accurate than Communist Party of Canada, which it really no longer was. And the Canadian Party, which, in 1925, 26, 27, was one of the most independent in the world, after 1930 was one of the most servile in the world. You will search long and hard to find an occasion when the Communist Party of Canada ever disagreed with anything that came out of the Soviet Union after that transformation at the end of the 20s. So that's what the Canadian Bolsheviks is about. It's about the birth and death of a revolutionary party. And I think it's a positive story. I mean, it's true. Ultimately, that experiment did not go to where it should have gone, and we didn't get a revolution out of it. But it was the most successful thing we've seen yet. It was an organization with thousands of members. It led mass labor struggles. It was a heroic organization. It deserves to be remembered from that. There's things they did wrong that we can learn from it, and there's things that they did right we can learn from. But the main thing is we can learn from what they did. And we can also just remember our own history and not let it get stolen from us. I'm now working, some of you may know the name John Riddell. And John and I have started work on the next chapter. And that's what happened to those communists who were expelled, in particular Morris Spector and Jack MacDonald. Because they didn't give up. They joined together. They tried to build a new revolutionary organization in the 1930s. And so what we're going to write about next is what that next generation of revolutionary socialists did and learned. And I hope maybe in about a year or a year and a half I'll be able to come back and talk about that one. Thank you again.